So, how do we push back against this agenda? At the poll at the beginning of our session, roughly 70% of folks showing up today said that they didn't yet understand the policy and the organizing strategy or weren't sure. So, right now, I'm going to briefly review the policy options and demands or our recommendations that we can make. And then Shai and Hillary will break down fights on the ground and different tactics and strategies there. Next slide. So very briefly, these policy recommendations come from the North Star Data Center Policy Toolkit, which is geared towards stopping, slowing, and restricting rampant data center expansion in the US at the local, state, and federal level. We include North Star interventions, the strongest possible options, and scaffolded steps to get there for when that's not feasible. Next slide. This toolkit is like a menu of options, mapping out all the possible policy tools from bans and zoning to water, air, energy, taxation, etc. So you can pick and choose what is going to work in your jurisdiction. Next slide. And we developed this toolkit in consultation with over 100 community organizers, state advocates, technical experts, and policymaker networks across the country. We're dropping in a link to the full list in the chat as well. So let's get into it. Next slide, please. What are the strongest possible policy interventions to stop nuclear expansion for the benefit of AI? Next slide. First, I want to discuss why our policy recommendations here are largely targeted at the federal level, not local, state, or tribal. At the height of the Cold War and in the wake of the Manhattan Project, Congress passed a law establishing a commission to govern nuclear energy. And then later in 1974, Congress transferred authority to regulate nuclear power to the newly created Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the NRC. Through these federal actions, Congress preempted states and localities from governing issues of nuclear safety in favor of a centralized federal safety framework. What this means is that federal law supersedes local and state law on this issue. And while this session discusses how the current federal administration is undermining the NRC's independent authority to regulate nuclear energy, it is still true that most regulations around nuclear are federally governed, meaning localities and states have very little authority over nuclear development. This doesn't mean that there are no demands that can be made at the local, state, and tribal level, particularly in stopping specific facilities, but the intervention points are different. Next slide. So our recommendations here are designed to reject AI being used as justification to roll back nuclear energy regulations. Because the staggering demand for energy to power AI data centers cannot be met with capacity from our existing power grid, AI firms are turning to nuclear as a source for additional power. But the reality is, as Heidi explained, that these nuclear development timelines, often 10 to 20 years, cannot safely match the rapid pace of AI development. But despite this, the government is fast-tracking nuclear development in ways that raise serious safety and oversight concerns. Next slide. So we have 4 recommendations. First, the federal government must reject the expansion of the nuclear industry for the benefit of AI firms. Expanding nuclear power without robust safeguards, at minimum, can lead to catastrophic risk. Civilian exposure to radiation, nuclear power plant failures, as well as the devastating effects of nuclear weapons have, for very good reason, led to the development of safety and probabilistic risk frameworks, radiation dose limits, and safety culture. But ironically now, the pretense of an AI arms race with China is being used to discard the very risk and safety thresholds that were established by the Cold War era nuclear arms race. The government justifies this elevated risk level by arguing that accelerated adoption of AI will supposedly give the US a technological edge over its global adversaries and lead to widespread societal benefits. But these claims, to put it nicely, are not verifiable. And given the untested and unproven nature of AI technology and the catastrophic risks of expanding nuclear power without robust safeguards, federal policymakers can reject efforts to rapidly scale the nuclear industry to meet the demands of AI firms. Next slide. Second, federal policymakers can ban the use of AI in the nuclear energy permitting process. The government is concerningly using AI technologies to expedite regulatory processes such as nuclear licensing and commissioning for civil and defense nuclear facilities. Nuclear licensing, as Heidi explained, is a well-established process that requires nuclear operators to demonstrate that the risks arising from their lifetime operations will be adequately controlled and to take responsibility for controlling and addressing these risks. Introducing generative AI to supposedly streamline nuclear licensing increases the likelihood that mistakes will arise in the process. Research has consistently demonstrated the lack of accuracy of generative AI and large language models, including a high rate of inaccurate results and high hallucination rates. And even minute errors here can compromise nuclear safety thresholds and lead to catastrophic consequences, including widespread radiation exposure. Next slide. Third, the federal government can reinstate the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's independence. As I mentioned earlier, the NRC was established in 1974 to act as an independent regulator, meaning it was intentionally shielded from political or industry influence. But through a series of executive orders in 2025, the White House has slowly pulled back the NRC's independence, first enabling the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, to oversee the regulatory process, and later requiring the NRC to establish shortened timelines on nuclear licensing. The executive orders also ask the NRC to consult about radiation exposure levels with the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy, two agencies that are, one, incentivized to expedite AI adoption, and two, lack relevant experience with radiation exposure limits. So federal policymakers can reinstate the NRC's independence to ensure that nuclear safety is not compromised by political aims. Next slide. Finally, the federal government must reinstate requirements that nuclear energy permitting meet global established safety standards for nuclear regulation. These risk analysis frameworks date back to the earliest moments of discovery at the height of the Cold War, and risk and safety thresholds have developed and changed over time, influenced by catastrophic disasters and the resulting shifts in public perception. And these events led to the establishment of radiation dose limits and targets based on the concept of the linear no threshold model, or LNT, which determined that risk increases linearly with dose and that no level of radiation exposure is risk-free. This model has wide-ranging international consensus and is based on long-term and detailed studies. Safety analysts also developed the ALARA risk principle, as low as reasonably achievable, to ensure that catastrophic risks are kept within tolerable societal limits, if we want to determine that that exists. But the White House executive orders in May 2025 recommend dismantling LNT and ALARA, rejecting this international consensus and increasing the public's risk of exposure to ionizing radiation. These should be reinstated. We often get the question of how to prevent the expansion of SMRs, or small modular reactors. Critically, if we kept stringent nuclear regulations, SMRs wouldn't be able to be built. Next slide. And finally, I just want to briefly talk about local and state and tribal interventions. While they do not target directly nuclear energy, data center moratoriums at the local, state, and tribal level, as well as any regulation to limit the amount of data center growth, can effectively stall the development of data centers and thus reduce the amount of energy needed to accelerate AI adoption. Moratoriums are temporary pauses on the permitting, approval, or construction of data centers in a specific jurisdiction. They are just one way to restrict data centers. For more, you can see our past training sessions on bans, moratoriums, and zoning. The recording link is in the chat. This is an indirect connection, but it is important given that mass AI adoption is being used to justify the deregulation of the nuclear industry. And similarly, communities can also prohibit off-grid and behind-the-meter power generation, which is also known as bring your own power solutions. These proposals might sound like a good idea, but often mean expanded gas generation or nuclear power and allow data centers to sidestep investments in the shared energy infrastructure they benefit from. And again, we have a whole session about energy and ratepayer protections with more information there.